Hi, I'm Brian, and today I'm going to teach you, hopefully, about handmade pizza dough and kind of making these things from scratch so that you get a feel for what goes into making a high-quality crust that you can just make in your own oven or even on your own grill. So I've made everything identical to the scenario that you'll have that I provided in your kits. So just kind of walking through some of the instructions here. I've got the flour, about 275 grams of flour in here. It comes out to be about 2 cups to 2.5 cups depending on the quality of the flour and how much protein it has. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. So I've got my sugar and salt mixture, I've got my olive oil, and then my yeast. So when I start adding these ingredients, you'll see that I'll keep the yeast separated from the sugar and the salt, because if they contact each other, it could kill the yeast and slow down the fermentation, and that's definitely something we want to avoid. So the first thing I'm going to do is put in my yeast so I know where it is. And I'm just going to put it over here on the side, and then I'm going to put the oil around the middle, and then I'm going to add the sugar and salt to the other side away from the yeast. And then I'm going to start gradually adding some of the water and just start mixing with my hands and just getting everything in there. And it's going to start off pretty firm. It's going to look like a pie crust, and eventually we're going to work this until it's a nice, smooth, elastic dough. And it's going to take a little bit of time and a little bit of patience, because as the dough hydrates, it will become smoother and more workable. It's kind of easier to manage. And we don't want to overhydrate it, because then it's going to get really sticky and very difficult to manage. So once this comes together, we're going to feel what the dough is like. And I'm literally just squeezing the dough out, kind of like Play-Doh, from my hands. And just making sure that everything is getting integrated, everything is getting some moisture, some hydration. And this flour is a whole grain flour, so it's going to be pretty thirsty. So you can see that's pretty sticky still. And the thing we want to do is work this dough enough so that we can say, yes, it is 100% uniform in its overall texture. And then we're going to give it a little rest so that it can finish hydrating. And then we'll check to make sure that it is done and fully elastic. All right. So I'm not really kneading, I'm just mixing by hand. All right. Feels pretty good there. So what I'll do at this point is I'll clean off my hands, and then I'm going to cover this and let it rest on the tabletop here for about 5 to 10 minutes, and then we'll come back and check on it. All right, so we've let our dough relax for a couple minutes, and you see it's still kind of gummy, but it's definitely starting to get more cohesive. So now we start the kneading process, and this is where people can be like, I don't know if I like pizza that much that I got to work for it, but it's worth it, believe me. So we're going to take it out, we're going to move it to the counter, and kneading is nothing more than really just folding this dough over and over again onto itself. So there's a million techniques. You'll see some people slap it down and then fold it over and pick it up and slap it down and fold it over. So I just roll it onto itself, and I just turn and roll and turn and roll, and you can see already it's starting to get smoother. And we're going to just keep doing that, and I'll just keep pushing this dough around and making it smooth. And then when we've come to a point where we see that it's not changing anymore, then we know that we've kneaded it enough. So we're going to keep kneading. And this is just my technique. What works for me, is just how I've been doing this for a few years. And just keep folding and folding. And you see it's easy to work with. It's really squishy, but we're going to just keep going until we feel that it's not as tacky, it's still very smooth. Eventually it'll clean all the dough off of your fingers and the counter, so it'll clean itself. And you can tell a flour is good for using for pizza when it starts to make these really thin sheets. So you can just stretch it and stretch it and stretch it, and then it takes a long time for it to rip. So that shows that it's got good elasticity. It's going to make good pizza. It's also good for like crusty breads, European style breads. So these types of flours are very good for that. And that's where you get your kids involved and just tell them to keep kneading it, and then, you know, come back in 5 minutes and they're still going. They'll roll it into logs or whatever. And just keep mixing, keep working it. And you see a lot of people, like, they would do that push technique, you know, very classic. And in all honesty, if we just let this dough sit for another hour at room temperature, it would eventually become smoother and smoother, because the water and the hydration in this dough allow the proteins to connect and develop that gluten. And that's what's trapping all that air in there. So we're getting pretty smooth here. And you always see a lot of bakers have very strong forearms. So just keep mixing. Still developing. This is getting pretty good. So I'm going to roll it into a ball, and that's where we're going to take a minute and feel it. See it, it's still tacky, but it's not super sticky. What stuck to me is just the dough that was really soggy on the outside of it. If I wash my hands off and I start poking at this, it's not going to stick to me too bad, and we can continue to see like it's getting more and more elastic, more and more stretchable into this, what we call the window pane test. So those are the things that we're looking for. When we've gotten to that point, we know we're pretty well developed, and this is when we can cut this into 2 pieces. And these will be our 2 pizzas. So this I'm just going to continue to shape a little bit, smooth it out. Now you can dunk these in oil at this point, put them in a plastic bag and leave them in the fridge for up to a week. Or you can dunk them in a little bit of oil and stick them right in a freezer, and they'll hold for several months. And then you just take them out, thaw them, and they're ready to go. So these are ready to rest, and then we'll get an example one that's had a couple of days to rest, and we'll stretch out and make some pizza. All right. So this is our rested dough. It's had a couple days in the fridge. You can see it's really smooth. It'll be very elastic, very easy to stretch. And then if we look at that window pane test, you can see it's really well developed. It can stretch pretty thin before breaking. All right, so shaping dough. I'm gonna mess with this one just a little bit, and then I'll shape a different one. If your dough flattens out or is very difficult to work with, just put it back into a ball and let it rest on the countertop for another 10 minutes, and it'll come right back to being the normal dough that you want to work with. You can grab another one. All right. People ask me, do you throw the dough up in the air and do all the spinning? And yes, I do. But I'm not going to do that here because I want you to have success and not floor pizza. So we put down a good bed of just regular all-purpose flour, anything you have on hand. You can use a little bit of rice flour in there, and you want a decent amount of flour on the outside of that, because that's going to take away all the sticky, and now this thing will slide wherever you want it to go. And when you're going to start making your pizza, you pretty much just dimple around where the crust is going to be, and you're not going to mess with that too much. You're going to stretch from the middle out and just give it like a little turn. And just keep turning that, and if it gets a little difficult, flip it over and just keep turning and keep that rim where it was and just stretch from the middle out. And this is where you would start, going to spin it, but we're not going to do that. So what we're doing is we're really just pushing down a little bit and stretching out. You don't want it too thin, because if it gets too thin, it'll rip, and then your pizza will kind of fall out the bottom when you try to get it off of your pan or off of your pizza stone. I highly recommend the use of a pizza stone if you have one. If not, they're relatively affordable, and you can pick them up pretty much anywhere, retail or through Amazon, of course. So all I'm doing is just stretching gently and just moving this. And you can let this rest, because you can see when I pull on it, it bounces back. Pull, bounce back. If you let that rest, it'll stop doing that. And then you can get it further and thinner if you like a real thin crust pizza. But I like mine pretty much a medium. So that's what I'm going to go with here. So, like I said, these should be about 8 to 10 inches. That's about an 8 to 10 inch crust right there. So that's good for one person if you're real hungry, or 2 people if you have a salad and a snack with it. So at this point, I'm going to move it over to my pan. And pizza doesn't always have to be round. It could be rectangle. It could be any shape you want. That's what makes pizza fun. And now we're going to give it a quick decorate. The oven's been preheated to the maximum temperature of my oven. Here at the shop, we do it about 450 to 500. And I've got a little bit of pesto. So this is a pumpkin seed pesto. So we're going to just spread that around here. And toppings, you can put whatever you want on pizza, but just don't overwhelm the dough. All right, you don't want to just add it like a buffet on there. You want it to be a complement to the crust, because the crust is your star. The ingredients complement all that. So we've got some nice, see, they were interested. They want to check that out. All right, a little bit of fresh mozzarella. Just pop that on there. Now, if you have a baking stone, you could put a little bit of dough on your parchment, like when you're all flattened out, put it on a piece of parchment, just slide it onto your baking stone. If you're a purist, you can use a bit of cornmeal or semolina flour, and it'll slide around on a pizza peel, and you can just slide it right onto your pizza stone. That looks pretty good. So, and notice how I'm leaving the edge alone. That's where you're going to grab onto this stuff, so you really don't want to cover everything up. I got some tomato slices. There you go. Here. All right. And then we would take this and put it right in the oven. There we go. This is on a hot stone, but again, if you put it on the grate, that would be fine as well. We'll let that go for about 5 to 10 minutes, and we'll check on it as pizza. You can darken it as much as you like. If people like it a little on the crispy or the soft side, you can take it in either direction. You can finish it with a little fresh basil, shake a salt and pepper or some roasted garlic right on top, slice it up, and you have a beautiful little pizza.